Hello, I'm Reverend Dr. Horace F. Whitaker Jr., and welcome to our channel, Thoughts for Living. We at Thoughts for Living are committed to publishing and creating useful and engaging content. We would hope this content helps us all better understand how our environment impacts our consciousness, and then how our consciousness influences our worldview. And together, how that might help us build a more sustainable world. Thank you for helping us in that job. We would hope if you have further questions, you'd reach out to us at thoughtsforliving.com. Thank you for your support. Hello, and welcome again to the Thoughts for Living podcast. We'd like to thank you for joining us for another episode, taking out of your time to engage our content. If you find this content useful, please click on the subscribe button below. And please, you can go to thoughtsforliving.com for more information about this particular episode and other episodes. And if you find the content meaningful to you, please download some music for about $1.25 US. We thank you for your support. We are continuing in this episode a discussion that we began around the issues being presented in the news regarding Jackson, Mississippi, and our brothers and sisters who are being exposed to inhumane conditions that you wouldn't find in third world countries here in the United States. And really, the only reason, there's no real justification for this taking place other than this is systemic racism, white supremacy at work. I'm sure for those of you who are keeping up with the news, you recognize that the human misery that our brothers and sisters are experiencing has been decades long in Jackson. It's just a representation of the monstrous combination of societal racialization and corporate domination. We are aware that states and local governments provide approximately 90% of infrastructure spending allocated for the operation and maintenance of water infrastructure. And that's according to a study by the CBO. And this arrangement leaves our brothers and sisters in Jackson specifically, and people of color and poor whites generally, including cities like Flint, Michigan, Newark, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Benton Harbor, Michigan, where the water supply was contaminated with lead. They're left at the mercy of white supremacist legislatures and authorities, and a direct legacy of generations of discrimination and segregation by the federal government as well, as we discussed in the previous episode. Segregation and apartheid goes hand in hand with racism, white supremacy. And from the time black people were kidnapped and brought here, we've seen in slavery, right? It's about control of black people's bodies and control of where black people live. That went on for 256 years. And then 50 years after the Civil War, which ended enslavement, and after that brief period where black people were in leadership roles during Reconstruction, white terrorist organizations like the KKK murdered and lynched black people, men, women, and children, many times because they were more industrious as entrepreneurs, and they were pretty much killed because they were better. This is one of the cases I believe Ida B. Wells spoke to in her writing in Memphis, Tennessee, when friends of hers were hung. And so it's about controlling black people's bodies, and it's been about, our history here has been about not only the control of our bodies, but control of our living spaces. And so to continue that practice that had begun in slavery, whites developed exclusionary zoning and basically wanting to prohibit and control where black people could live. Basically, white people wanted apartheid. Whites wanted segregation. They did not want to live with black people. But after the Supreme Court said in 1917 that that was illegal, they didn't just let it go. Okay, Supreme Court, you ruled that we can't legally control where black people live. Well, they came up with another idea, right? To do the same thing. They hired northern planners to come up with legally defensible ways for them to practice apartheid. So then they came up with restrictive covenants, right? Where whites agreed among themselves not to sell property or to sell a home in a community to anybody they deemed undesirable. Now, this affected disproportionately black people. It was created to control black people's living spaces and to control their bodies. But at this time, early on, they applied this also to Catholics, to immigrants that were coming into the country at the time, to Jews. They applied this to Southern Italians and immigrants from Asia. As been reported, anybody who was not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right, was not allowed to live in predominantly white communities. And so it was this desire of white citizens of this nation to not live with people that they deemed undesirable, which the epitome of was black people. So they created the ghettos and put the so-called undesirables into that area. And since in those areas, you don't own property, you're renting, right? So then you don't have the financial support, right, that whites have in their segregated communities where they own properties. And so you see this creation of apartheid. Now, these racial covenants were in place when the United States economy collapsed. And when the New Deal came about to try to make life better, basically for white folks, if black people got crumbs, it would be okay. The federal government used the restrictive covenants that white people had in place. As a matter of fact, they wouldn't insure a home that was not under the restrictive covenant, which means that the person applying for the home had to be white. And this goes on from they've been practicing since practically 1917. It's been a part of the culture, right? And then it changes from exclusionary zoning to restrictive covenants. All of the while, whites are developing wealth and through home ownership, while that same mechanism is being denied to black people. Now, that would have been enough. But the point that's really evil is that black people paid taxes. Federal taxes were taken from black people to build, that were used by the federal government to finance home loans that black people couldn't get. So basically, we're helping to build the white middle class. Now, all the while, you hear these narratives white people are using to justify the exploitation of black people is that we're lazy. We live in bad neighborhoods. When black people move in, the home rates go down. No, this was by design. And the United States government went along with the wishes of white people. This is the United States government supporting white privilege, granting whites advantages that they would not give other citizens. And this segregation is the foundation of the inequality that is experienced in the United States. And then we come to find out those communities that were redlined, hazardous, 75% of those areas are still lived in by black and minority people, and they're still under-resourced. Whereas 91% of the areas that they said were green, that they made exclusively white in the 1930s, today, those same areas, 91% of those areas are still white. And they're still upper and middle class. So this has been the legacy of the United States government in relation to black people specifically, and brown people, as well as poor whites and Jews, Southern Italians, other people that they didn't deem white back in the day. Now, a lot of those ethnicities have now gotten on board and done what's necessary. Now they're considered to be white folks. But the legacy for blacks is still the same. And that segregation is what exposes us to further exploitation and further oppression, as is the case we see today in Jackson, Mississippi, where you have a supermajority legislature, if I'm not mistaken, white governor, white Senate control, Republican control. And even though, I will say this, even though the legislature has voted for funds, not the funds that Jackson officials requested, but they have voted for funds to be dispersed. They have this other level, this board that includes the governor, the treasurer, and someone else, and they deny giving Jackson what their representatives have said they should have. Now, if that's not white supremacy, I don't know what is. If that's not dictatorial in this so-called democracy, I don't know what is. Representatives of the people have voted to make apportionment to the citizens of Jackson, and this board steps in, this governor and his ilk steps in to say they shouldn't get the funds. Now, another part of this is that this governor bragged about, when he was running for the governorship, of not supporting Jackson receiving any funds to repair the water system. Now, even though Jackson is asking and has made requests for funds to repair the system, we see in Jackson state officials taking federal funds for women and children and stealing those funds. We've had people already found guilty of fraud. They are taking money that should be going to women and children, the majority who would be disproportionately black. And they're giving money, stealing the money, to give it to their white friends, including, it's purported that Brett Favre is involved. And we hear very little about him in the news. Now, if it was just Jackson, that would be enough. But this same white supremacist attitudes and behavior we find in Benton Harbor, Michigan, which we don't hear about that case. It's a dynamic organizer in that area. I believe his name is Reverend Pinckney. Those of you all who can help, I know Jackson is getting most of the press, but Benton Harbor has been in the same shape since 2016, 2014. And they're dealing with lead in their water. And in that situation, you have the same, pretty much the same kind of situation where you have white leadership, supposed leadership, blocking efforts of the citizens to obtain clean water. And we know that there is no proportion of lead that is safe that can be taken into the human body. I think the United States has something like 15 parts per billion. But we've seen cases where I believe in some of these cases, they're finding lead at 3, 4, 5, 10 times the level that the United States has set for lead, even though science tells us there is no acceptable amount of lead. And it stunts the growth of children, their cognitive development. And so while we are in Benton Harbor, what they did there, if I'm not mistaken, the whites moved out of the community and formed their own community like they do in a lot of places. And they have clean water, a system that provides clean water. I think it's less than 5 miles from Benton Harbor. But now ask me, are those whites willing to share that with the black people of Benton Harbor? So white flight, segregation, white leaves the area, and now the area becomes majority black. And when the whites leave, what happens? Right? The resources, right? Because the government has framed it that the resources go with white people. The tax base goes with home ownership and land ownership. And then even when we do labor, the people in Jackson can't use the water. The people in Benton Harbor can't use the water. The water's poisonous. But they're asking black people to still pay a water bill. What kind of sense is that? Wow. As you can see, we see the world a little bit differently. We think that's important because if we see the world differently, it might help us in making different decisions. And those different decisions might lead us to a different kind of world, a more loving, kind, and sustainable world. Thank you for helping us in that endeavor. Please feel free to reach out to us at thoughtsforliving.com. Have a great rest of your week.